Hurricane. A fishing trip to paradise becomes the vacation from hell.
We still thought that with the speed and power of that boat that we could outrun the weather.
A flight through a blizzard. When this airplane is iced over, passengers prepare for the worst.
I grabbed Tom's hand and started saying my prayers.
And I looked at Connie and we said goodbye to each other.
Water spouts. A giant vortex slams into a Miami bus, holding a load of people hostage. Powerful storms and the people who survive them, coming up on Storm Warning. The beautiful Mexican port of Manzanillo can be a great place to start a vacation, if the weather cooperates. Doctors Hal Niebling and Mike Thomas have joined friends Ed Rangoni and Rick Macklin to charter a newly built fishing boat, the Oasis.
Here is the Oasis.
It's supposed to be the perfect trip to a volcanic island chain over 200 miles offshore. Except the men are playing weather roulette.
We were supposed to be out in those islands before the hurricane season, but unfortunately, it took longer to make the boat than it was scheduled.
The delay has pushed the voyage into hurricane season.
I had no idea. I thought it was a great time to go.
At first, everything seems fine.
Like it's going to be favorable for us, so we're keeping our fingers crossed.
But 400 miles to the south, a tropical storm, born off the west coast of Central America, is building in intensity. The new boat's state-of-the-art weather prediction equipment isn't working, and the friends are too distracted by game fish to care.
Nice job.
We had spectacular fishing, and we caught blue marlin and striped marlin.
The best wahoo fishing I've ever had.
This is the 6th fish of the day we've had on.
Nice little sunset.
At twilight on the third day, the men celebrate escaping the stress of their normal lives.
Are we having fun yet?
This group knew each other. These guys are just the kind of guys that you're really happy to be friends with.
But the friends don't recognize the frontal bands of a hurricane building on the horizon. By morning, it's clear that the weather has turned. Mike Thomas radios a friend in California.
JD, we need a weather report for the San Bernardino area. Can you get that to us?
To give you a little better perspective where this hurricane is, it's named Darby. It's a pretty big one. It's big, mean, and nasty. Winds are 145 gusting to 165. This thing's big, it's mean, it's coming up the line.
Hurricane Darby is now roaring on shore in Acapulco, with high seas and winds over 70 miles per hour. Boats are torn from their moorings and slammed up against shorelines, where fishermen desperately try to rescue their equipment.
Instead of moving 5 knots an hour, it started moving 20 knots an hour and came upon us much, much quicker than anybody possibly expected. That morning, we tried to make a run for Cabo San Lucas.
And we still thought that with the speed and power and size of that boat that we could outrun the weather.
We had 1,000,000 horsepower on this boat, but it didn't do any good.
And we learned how powerful the ocean really was.
As we went north, we got into heavier and heavier seas.
The swirls kept on building and building and moving faster than we could move.
These humongous mountains of water were coming towards us.
The roiling sea is beginning to make even the more experienced sailors queasy.
There are waves like I've never seen before. They'd hit us sideways and nearly turned the boat over.
We gotta make a decision quick. We're having a water problem in the bilge. We've got water up to our knees.
Mexican naval authorities are not responding to Mayday calls.
Everybody was very concerned. I mean, you know, let's face it, we all got to a point where we thought we were probably not going to make it. And there was a fear that if we were in the water, being shark-infested waters, it's not an area where you want to be bobbing around in the water.
We all understood the rules, that if you went over, the chances of surviving were slim and none.
When we come back, a dangerous rescue in the midst of a hurricane. And flying into a blizzard can be fatal. Hurricane Darby is now driving rough seas far inland, all along central Mexico's coastline. 200 miles offshore, 5 Americans are in the eye of the storm, trying to keep their sport fishing boat from sinking in shark-infested waters. A nearby volcanic island offers little refuge from 110-mile-per-hour winds.
We're about half a mile off the island, protecting ourselves from a hurricane. We got winds at about 70 miles an hour, and it sucks.
San Benedicto is basically a volcano. There were outcroppings and everywhere, and there were no beaches. The cliffs were almost straight up. We were considering running the boat up on the rocks, but there was a considerable risk if we did that.
Mayday, Mayday, do you copy?
Mexican naval authorities haven't responded to Mayday calls. In desperation, the crew radios the U.S. Coast Guard.
Oasis calling. Mayday, Mayday, Mayday.
But the nearest station is hundreds of miles to the north, and the Oasis is starting to sink.
The boat was taking on water, and we didn't know if the hull was cracked.
You could go down into the engine compartment, and the water would be up to your knees. There's not supposed to be any water down there. And the engine's turning, the shafts are spinning, and so water was flying all over the place down there. And then you could look out on one side, on the outboard side of the engine, and see raw water boiling out there. And you could look out the other side and see raw water boiling out there. It was really scary.
After flying 1,400 miles south, the U.S. Coast Guard finally arrives. But again, there is bad news.
They reported to me that it was so rough that they couldn't hold their course or do anything for us.
Basically, they said, whatever you do, do not get out of the boat. Don't vacate the boat because your chances are very slim to stay in the boat until the end.
The Coast Guard drops a bilge pump and radios a Honduran freighter, the Chiquita Roma. The skipper decides to run full speed, 200 miles, to rescue the storm-tossed Americans. But will the boat stay afloat long enough for rescue?
For at least 12 hours, we thought we were going under, and we would be in the water.
Finally, the freighter arrives.
The captain of the Chiquita Roma asked us to pull along to his port side, and the two boats would then mesh together, and we would climb up the nets, and which I guess were about 3 to 4 stories high. And after going through what we had for 30 hours, we were all low on energy. Mike was injured. It was pretty difficult getting up those nets.
Here's one light. Hey, hello. One light.
I know when we got on that freighter, besides being real thankful to be alive, I shook for over a day. The adrenaline was still flowing, and I could not hold still. It was a real scary experience. I've never gotten over it.
The Oasis is cast off, never to be seen again.
It was incredible how much abuse that boat took and how much the guys took.
As the Americans toast their rescuers, residents along Mexico's northern coast take stock of their losses. The hurricane has pushed a drowning flood far inland. In Acapulco, the Mexican military has imposed martial law. And beachside tourist districts are in ruins. One person is dead, and hundreds of coastal homes are destroyed. As the 5 Americans are reunited with their families, they realize that the bonds of friendship have deepened into the brotherhood of those who've survived weather at its worst.
Times I think every one of us was sure that we were going down.
We've all become very close. We realize the value of life, and thank our stars that we're alive every day.
Up next, an ice-laden plane heads for disaster, and twisters in the water. When blizzards sweep through the northern United States, all but one form of transportation stops cold: air travel. Despite severe winters in this part of the country, most major American airports send planes off into snowstorms. It's snowing when Tom and Connie Merrill arrive at New York's LaGuardia Airport, heading home from celebrating Tom's 40th birthday. Their flight to Cleveland is still scheduled despite the weather.
It was a very snowy day that day, and the weather was really starting to blow in pretty heavy at that time. There were a lot of people in the airport saying that the airport should be closed.
And I really didn't enjoy flying a lot. I was like a white knuckle flyer.
As the storm worsens, the Merrills wish they had stayed in their hotel.
The wind was approximately 30-mile-an-hour gusts. The snow was a wet type, heavy snow.
The airport has put on extra crews to clear off potentially deadly ice that is quickly forming on the aircraft. Tom is a novice pilot. He knows that on days like this, even the vapor in a cloud can cover an aircraft with dangerous atmospheric ice.
With what flight training I've had, I know that moisture on wings is zero tolerance, it's called. You're not allowed any moisture on a wing.
Dan Ciccio is an airline pilot and accident investigator for LaGuardia Airport. He's well aware of the negative effects that weather can have on an airplane.
All kinds of weather present unique problems to the airline pilot. We have precipitation and we have a cold surface. The precipitation can then freeze on the surface.
Any buildup of ice can change the shape of the wing, decreasing the amount of lift it can provide, at the same time adding to the weight of the aircraft. Ciccio demonstrates the effect in flight simulation.
Essentially, it changes the whole design of the airplane, and the flight characteristics are unpredictable. So that if this occurs, really the flight crew does not know how that airplane is going to respond.
Ice in the engines is what sent Air Florida Flight 90 crashing into Washington, D.C.'s Potomac River in January of 1982. Ice also altered the instruments that could have detected the problem. Only 5 people survived the crash. The Merrill's plane has now been sitting in the cold at the gate for an hour. Finally, they get the call to board.
U.S. Air Flight 405 is now ready to board.
There were, I believe, 12 or 14 planes in front of us for takeoff.
It was just unbelievable that anybody was taking off in this weather and that the airport was open.
Crews immediately set to work to de-ice the plane according to regulation. But the de-icing truck breaks down behind the aircraft.
So we sat on the runway for about 35 to 40 minutes prior to takeoff.
You really wondered, are we really going to take off in this weather?
Darkness falls at the airport. The Merrill's plane is still at the gate. Tom grows concerned about the time that has elapsed since the plane was de-iced. He calls a flight attendant.
I had noticed early on snow accumulating on the right wing of the aircraft. It said, ma'am, there's snow on the wing. Could you have the pilot look at it?
The co-pilot checks his instrumentation, but finds no indication of ice. As the engines start up, Tom wishes he could leave.
At that particular time, it would have been a penalty to get off that aircraft. It would have been a federal offense.
405 control, takeoff.
When the pilot said they were going to be taking off now, I grabbed Tom's hand and started saying my prayers.
As the plane begins to lift off the runway, the cabin starts to shake violently.
This was not normal.
The pilot struggles to control the plane, but it suddenly goes into a stall.
And I looked at Connie and we said goodbye to each other.
When he looked over and said goodbye, I think he said it very loud because it's something that I remember in my mind.
The plane drops 160 feet to the ground.
And I remember hearing such profound noises of crunching and scraping of the ground and just so much noise.
Then it slams into the water at the end of the runway.
I remember pitch black and just soaking wet, and the smell of jet fuel was unbelievable.
Connie drags her injured husband from the sinking plane and helps him swim to shore. She watches, shivering, as rescue trucks race down the runway to the crash site. Help finally arrives. 24 passengers have made it to shore, but 27 others don't survive.
This happened so fast and the plane sank so fast that the only people that survived saved themselves.
The Merrills tell crash investigators about seeing ice on the wings. 2 weeks later, the Federal Aviation Administration proposes sweeping new safety rules for flying in icy weather. And the FAA was joined by NASA scientists to crack the dangers of atmospheric ice. Wind tunnels test new technology like electro-explosive de-icing, where a shock wave travels down the skin of a wing to shatter accumulated ice. Commercial aviation companies now subject their jet engines to wind and supercooled water droplets. This tests what their performance will be in ice-producing clouds. Here, a prototype temporary hangar lined with infrared lights flash melts ice on an aircraft. But pilots say the most critical advances needed are in forecasting the kinds of weather that ice planes.
The decision that the flight crew makes is only as good as the information that they're presented. The reason that these accidents happen is failures of our system. I think that we all try our very best in the industry, but we cannot beat Mother Nature totally.
And beating Mother Nature is a risk that Connie Merrill says she'll never take again by traveling in dangerous weather.
We live in a society that is so busy and so hurried, and we have to get there. And I think that we tend to forget about safety, and that has to change, because we all know when something is being rushed and pushed and you're at your limit, you're asking for mistakes.
Up next, a bus driver's effort to save his passengers from nature's wrath. Heat, humidity, and an ocean breeze. For Miami tourists, this means beach weather. But most visitors don't know that these atmospheric conditions sometimes cause disaster in southern Florida. Today, bus driver Hugo Luisant's run to Miami Beach is packed.
I have 48, 49 people was on the bus. It was very cloudy. Most of them was tourists.
The bus route to the beach is a sightseeing favorite because it passes over a long causeway across beautiful Biscayne Bay. But on this warm spring day, humid air rising from the hot ground percolates up into giant thunderclouds. Warm air cools at high altitudes, then falls, creating a powerful circulation within these clouds, so common in southern Florida.
We call them pulse thunderstorms because they pulse up and they pulse down.
Jim Lucine issues warnings for Miami's National Weather Service. Daniel Brown sees something potentially dangerous in the atmosphere over Florida. the jet stream.
In late spring, it's relatively rare to have the jet stream all the way into South Florida.
Stiff winds are attracting windsurfers to the waterfront. But they're also adding power to the circulation within the thunderclouds. This creates a sucking updraft.
Miami weather. We got the call that it was a funnel cloud in the air, and a few minutes later we got the call from a television station that said they saw it on the ground. Did you say if it was touching the ground yet, or is it just a funnel in the air? And at that point we knew there was a larger magnitude storm than we typically get down here. You want to start typing up a warning there? Someone just reported a large funnel cloud there near downtown. Downtown? Yeah.
Others are now seeing an ominous funnel drop down to meet the vortex on the ground.
Wow, look at this funnel, Dave. Dave, you looking at this funnel?
The funnel quickly organizes into a full-fledged tornado. Twisters are not uncommon in southern Florida, but this one is more powerful than usual.
At that point, we knew there was very large magnitude, and it was actually moving into Biscayne Bay at that time.
And Hugo Luison is about to cross the Biscayne Bay causeway with his busload of tourists. The driver has no idea a tornado is approaching. Over the bay, it becomes a waterspout, and more violent. By the time Hugo sees the waterspout, it's too late to outrun it.
Oh, the boats were shaking. Blow, the trash and the newspaper, all of them.
Hugo says the funnel swirled around the causeway for 7 to 8 terrifying minutes before finally moving off.
It's probably about 15, 20 miles an hour.
A tornado again. The funnel tears through downtown before dissipating. Residents begin to react to what just happened. As people start to clear the streets of debris, the Weather Service starts to calculate the tornado's force.
It had winds of 100 to 10 miles an hour, and in gusts, that could actually pick up a vehicle and overturn it.
Hugo is overjoyed with his survival.
When I look out on the bridge, a big truck turned over up there. I said, Lord, thank you.
Many others said thankful prayers because no lives were lost. The day Miami was swept by a twister.